Hey guys, tonight we're travelling back, not to the grand arenas of Rome or the battlefields of history, but to somewhere much quieter, much warmer. Tonight we settle into the flickering embrace of an ancient Greek hearth. You crouch beside it now, the firelight soft on your hands, the scent of ash and warm barley hanging in the still air. It's not a battlefield. There are no mighty heroes or tragic betrayals here, just gentle crackles, worn sandals, and the patient labour of those who kept the home alive one ember at a time. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Not because it's dangerous. Oh, no. It's because it's boring, mind-numbingly slow, but in the best possible way. Think endless barley, unhurried sweeping, conversations with goats, and a goddess who wants everything tidy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I love knowing who's warming their toes around this little digital fire. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the cool morning shadows of a low-roofed stone house, feet padding across packed earth worn smooth by 1,000 chores. The fire from last night still clings faintly to the hearth, just a memory of red coals curled beneath grey ash. Your first task? Whisper it back awake. The hearth is sacred, you know, not just a cooking space, but Hestia's throne. No statue, no chariot, just this humble fire. You nudge a pine twig into the ashen bed. It crackles softly. A few curls of smoke rise like sleepy ghosts. That's the spirit. Add a twist of dried sage. It helps mask the smell of old stew and sheep hair. Your fingers work the flint with slow, practiced rhythm. The first spark feels like a whisper from the gods. That's not poetic exaggeration. Some folks really believed the flame was divine. Hestia didn't crash banquets or hurl lightning bolts. She just stayed home. She was home. Her power lived in warmth, steadiness, repetition. Kind of like you. Most mornings start this way. Squatting on an uneven clay floor, one eye watering from the smoke, a cat already winding around your ankle even though you haven't touched the bread yet. You clear a little space around the hearth, sweeping out last night's crumb trails and the telltale dust of charcoal. Archaeologists still find these hearth traces, concentric ash layers, blackened soil, the odd chicken bone, all domestic poetry, if you squint hard enough. You find the old bronze tripod setted over the coals. Its legs are worn and wobbly like a one-legged goat trying to pose dignified. The pot that goes on top, heavy, a bit dented, but trustworthy, like your Aunt Thalia. You reach for the barley jar. It's sealed with a crust of beeswax, keeps the weevils out. Crack it open, scoop out a handful and toss the grains into a rough stone mortar. Grind, grind, grind. It's not romantic. Your arms ache. But the rhythm is comforting, and besides, your upper arms are going to look amazing by 600 BCE standards. You add a splash of water from a clay jug, careful not to wake the sleeping bees who occasionally drink from the rim. Then you toss in a few crumbles of last night's cheese. There's some mould on the edge. You scrape it off like a pro. Food safety hasn't been invented yet, just guts of steel. As the pot simmers, the steam carries scents of goat milk and roasted barley. Outside, a rooster screams like it's being robbed. You glance toward the window, just a hole in the wall really. Pale morning light filters in, catching flecks of ash floating like lazy snow. The hearth crackles louder now, and you smile. Success. The fire is alive, but there's more to do. Always. You check the fire ring. Its placement in the house matters. Not too close to the wall, or the thatch might smoulder. Not too far, or the goddess might feel snubbed. Historians still argue whether hearths were moved seasonally. Some say they shifted them closer to doors in summer for airflow. Others insist they stayed sacred and unmoved. You just know you're not dragging this fire pit anywhere. Not today. From a high shelf, you pull down a twist of herbs. Marjoram, mostly. It smells like dusty lemon and old sandals. You crush a few sprigs between your fingers and toss them into the flames. They sizzle and spit, sending up tiny sparks. Hestia's version of a thank you wink. Then there's the bread. Oh, the bread. You reach under a reed mat and lift yesterday's half-baked loaf. It's dense, hard. If you threw it, it could be used in warfare. You tear off a piece anyway, toast it over the flame and rub it with garlic. A breakfast fit for a priestess, or a very hungry goat. And speaking of goats, there's one now sticking its ridiculous head through the open doorway, eyeballing your barley porridge. You point at it with a burnt stick. No, you whisper. It doesn't care. Goats are anarchists. The cat's curled up now, smug and sooty, absorbing the heat like a tiny sun sponge. You envy it. But envy doesn't stir pots. The fire's steady. Your stomach's warm. You take a moment to sit back, resting against the wall. The clay cools your back. The hearth glows soft gold. And somewhere outside, someone's already arguing about taxes at the agora. Let them. For now, this is your world. Emberlight, barley, sacred flame, and chores that never quite end, but somehow never grow old either. You're getting good at this, you know. The way you crouch low, poke the fire with a fig stick just so, and judge the mood of the coals by their size. Well, it's practically a conversation. The hearth is like a cranky elder, warm if you treat her right, absolutely insufferable if ignored for even a minute. So you coo and shuffle and whisper, and the fire flickers back like she's maybe willing to tolerate you today. Coaxing flames from ash isn't just a household chore, it's a sacred skill. In ancient Greece, if the fire went out, you couldn't just relight it with any old spark. Oh no, that would be like replacing grandma with a scarecrow. The flame had to be borrowed from another hearth. Ideally, one kept burning at the city's central Prytaneon, where Hestia's eternal fire blazed without fail. Which means, if you let yours die, you're hiking across town in your worst sandals, explaining to officials why you've committed a spiritual faux pas before breakfast. So no pressure. You crouch again with your tools, flint, dry tinder, a little bundle of olive pulp kindling tied with the old reed string. That olive pulp, it's not just trash, it's perfect fire food. After pressing olives for oil, the leftover mash dries out into crispy little clumps that ignite beautifully. Modern folks toss it. You cherish every smoky morsel. Archaeologists have even found charred bits of this stuff in ancient hearths, which suggests your great-great-grand someone already knew how to burn like a boss. The coals today are moody. You blow gently, face close enough to smell last night's stew ghosting off the bricks. A few sparks dance, teasing you. You mutter something halfway between a prayer and a grumble. If fire had ears, it would smirk. Then, ignition. A lazy little flame curls up, licking the kindling with golden patience. It's enough. You settle back on your heels like a victorious champion, albeit one with soot on your nose and a crick in your spine. You're not done though. Fire is only the beginning. You grab a stick and gently rake the embers into formation. Hot on the left for boiling, warm in the centre for stewing, and cool on the right for flatbreads. A kitchen triangle of thermal precision, long before anyone invented stovetops. It's all done by feel, muscle memory passed down like lullabies. You don't measure heat, you listen to it. You reach for the bronze fire tongs and adjust a chunk of charcoal. They clink in your hand, cold and a bit too short, because Uncle Diodoros decided last summer that he needed just a little bit of bronze for his fishing weights. You adjust anyway, careful not to tip the iron cooking pot you said earlier. One of the handles is cracked. You whisper encouraging things to it. Please don't break today. As you arrange the pots and embers, the morning light finally breaks across the threshold. It hits the wall and spills across the floor like honey, catching the suspended particles of ash in its path. Dust motes waltz above the hearth, visible only for a moment. It's oddly beautiful, this whole dance of light and heat and dirt. That's when the smell hits you. A rich, deep whiff of last week's fish stew, still faint in the bricks, mingled with today's barley simmer and a hint of singed olive branch. It's pungent, comforting in a this is home kind of way, like how you'd miss the sound of dripping water if you lived under a leaky roof long enough. You wipe your hands on your tunic and stand for a moment, stretching your back. Above you, the smoke hole in the roof lets out a lazy plume of grey. Some historians argue these smoke holes weren't as common as we think, especially in poorer homes. Others suggest that most homes just had a blackened ceiling and an open door. You look up at the char-streaked roof beam and decide the historians might be onto something. It's not glamorous work tending fire. There are no odes written to kindlers, no marble statues of the person who scraped out the ash pit for the 1000th time. And yet, here you are, feeding something older than Zeus, keeping a goddess company with nothing more than dried twigs and persistent optimism. The neighbours are starting to stir now. You hear the clink of pottery, the squeal of a pulley drawing water from a well. Someone shouts about figs. Too many figs, not enough figs. figs that mysteriously vanished, the usual drama. You turn back to your fire. It's strong now, crackling confidently, like it owns the room. You smile, even though your hands are already speckled with soot and your hair smells like smoked thyme. To the side, in a small ceramic bowl, you've set aside a bit of the new fire for an offering. Not because you're pious every moment of the day, but because, well, just in case. A pinch of barley, a twist of herb, a whisper to the flame. You're not looking for miracles, just no burned lentils, no cracked pots, maybe a nap. You sit cross-legged beside your work, one hand extended toward the warmth. Your skin glows soft orange in the light, a reflection of something older than myth. Hestia's fire isn't dramatic. It doesn't thunder or blind or destroy. It just waits, warms, endures, and so do you. Your knees crack as you stand again. The hearth's fire hums behind you, content and steady, and now it's time to wake the rest of the kitchen. Not that it ever truly sleeps. The air is thicker here in the prep area, part shadows, part flour dust, part ancient cooking decisions still clinging to the walls like gossip. You sweep a hand across a wooden shelf, brushing away a curl of the old onion skin and a few suspicious breadcrumbs. In the far corner, a clay bowl hides yesterday's attempt at cheese. It smells committed. You decide not to open negotiations with it just yet. The ground is cool under your feet as you reach for the kitchen broom, a tied bundle of rushes worn to a soft fan from years of faithful swishing. You start your slow, deliberate sweep, herding ash and goat hair toward the door. There's something oddly meditative about it. Sweep, step, sweep, flick. It's not glamorous, but it's grounding, like reciting a quiet prayer with your feet. As you move, you glance toward the open wall slit that serves as a window. Beyond it, the courtyard is waking too. A sleepy donkey heaves itself upright, chickens debate social order, and the family's youngest boy sprints by barefoot, clutching a fig and a guilty expression. Back inside, your tools await. The mortar, the pestle, the old curved knife you inherited from your grandmother, its wooden handle shiny with generations of grip. You select a fat garlic clove, pluck a few wild herbs from a bunch hanging like a shriveled bouquet, and begin the daily grind. Literally. The pestle moves in circles, the sound muffled, rhythmic. Garlic, salt, maybe a touch of vinegar if there's any left. Your hands move with the confidence of muscle memory, though your brain is already drifting to 100 other things, mending that cracked amphora, feeding the cat again. Or whether anyone ever found out who spilled that olive oil at the last family gathering. Barley is bubbling gently at the hearth. You give it a stir, feeling the texture thicken just enough. Not too much. You've made that mistake before, and then it turns into barley paste, a fate worse than Spartan breakfast. Somewhere out there, historians are still arguing whether different classes flavoured their porridge with honey, herbs, or just stoic resignation. You're pretty sure the truth lies somewhere in the middle. As the smell intensifies, you grab a handful of dried figs from a basket. You roll one between your fingers, press it to your nose. Still soft, still sweet. You plop it into the pot. One fig only. This is not a festival day, and that amphora of honey won't refill itself. You stir slowly, lazily. The porridge sighs in the heat. Suddenly there's a thump behind you. You spin around to find the goat. Again. Inside the kitchen this time, staring straight at the bread scrap on the floor like it just witnessed a divine omen. You point your spoon at it. "I see you," you say. It doesn't blink. You grab a reed mat and flap it in its direction. With a snort of judgment, it backs out the door, hooves clattering, leaving behind a faint trail of musky barnyard regret. The bread basket is next, flat loaves wrapped in a faded cloth, warm from the hearth's proximity. You tear off a chunk and dip it into the barley, savouring the way it steams against your lips. Nutty, salty, just a whisper of sweet from the fig. Not bad. You've done worse. Once you used sour wine instead of vinegar, and the whole thing tasted like someone's afterthought of a poem. You rinse your fingers in the water basin. Cool, clear, filled from the cistern earlier this morning. The clay jug it came from sits on a ledge, lopsided but proud. There are faint etchings on the side, waves or maybe snakes. Hard to tell. Historians still argue whether these little doodles were family symbols or just ancient doodle therapy. With your hands cleaned, you move on to the next small rite, seasoning the cooking surface. You dip a clean cloth into a bowl of oil, pressed from last season's olives, green gold and sharp on the nose, and rub it gently along the pan's worn interior. You do this slowly, respectfully. Like talking a friend back from a meltdown, this pan has seen things. Somewhere outside, a lyre plays. Probably your neighbour's son again, trying to charm the baker's daughter. Badly. The notes drift in like a drunk bee. Inside, your fire hisses softly as a bit of sap explodes in a twig. You wipe your forehead, smudging it with soot you'll forget about until someone makes a comment at dinner. The cat finally returns, stretching luxuriously, and deposits itself right in the middle of your workspace. You nudge it gently. It ignores you. Typical. You toss it a fish scale from last night's meal, and it blinks once in what you generously interpret as gratitude. You pick up a small bowl and begin sorting lentils. By hand, of course. One by one, stones from legumes. It's tedious, and your back is starting to ache. But there's a strange satisfaction to it. It's like picking thoughts out of a crowded mind, clearing space. Some days you think the lentils are staring back. Just then, a neighbour calls your name. You glance up, startled, and see a familiar face peeking through the open doorway, holding out a cloth bundle. Extra herbs, they say, from yesterday's gathering. Smell it first. If it stings your nose, throw it out. You accept it with a smile, knowing half the herbs in there are probably useless, and the other half could revive a dying mule. Either way, it's a gesture. And that counts for something. You thank them, tuck the bundle onto a shelf and return to your fire. The barley is ready. You ladle it out into a waiting bowl, set it on the wide stone ledge to cool, and glance at your hands. Still whole, still strong, still doing the quiet work that keeps the house moving, one tiny invisible ritual at a time. The fire hums its low song as you wipe your hands on a fraying apron. Today, you've got a performance ahead. Not on a stage. No applause here. Just the high drama of kitchen choreography, amphorae lifting, pot juggling, and the occasional near-death experience by clay shard. You start with the amphorae, those long, elegant storage jars with their charming habit of being heavier than sin and perfectly shaped to bruise shins. You brace your legs, wrap both arms round the nearest one and heave. It doesn't budge. Of course it doesn't. You shift your grip, mutter something slightly unkind about the gods of pottery and try again. This time, the amphora lifts, just an inch, enough to scoot it a little to the left, where it can spill olive oil in peace and dignity. Ancient Greek kitchens weren't built for elegance. They were built for function, and function meant manoeuvring bulky pottery over open flames using hooks, tripods, and a healthy amount of caution. There's debate even now about how early hearths actually worked. Were there chimney vents? Side airflows? Or did everyone just live in perpetual smoke haze with a cough that sounded like a goat bleating underwater? You're voting for the smoke haze. Your eyes already sting from the morning fire and your tunic smells like thyme and carbon. You squat near the fire, grabbing a pair of pot tongs, bronze and crooked, but reliable, and reach for a smaller ceramic vessel set beside the coals. It's time to warm the lentils. The pot is still slick from yesterday's stew. You scrape the sides with a bent spoon, stir the contents, and try not to knock it over like last week. That was messy. Your cousin still hasn't let you forget the lentil avalanche of 4 days ago. The kitchen is alive now, buzzing with motion. You shift between pots, checking one for simmering, another for boiling, all while balancing ingredients in the folds of your apron like a very focused, very flammable juggler. One careless move and it's lentils in the ashes, or worse, a cracked pot. And in your house, cracked pots don't die. They get repurposed as grain scoops, herb pots, or emergency chicken feeders. You drop in a few peppercorns, precious, exotic, rare enough to make your stomach wince as they fall. Not because of the taste, but because you remember how far they've come. Traded across endless dusty roads, bartered in marketplaces where sandals squeak and goats bicker. Some historians argue pepper wasn't common in average households. Maybe it wasn't, but your aunt once paid half a fish for 5 corns, and that's commitment. As the lentils begin to bubble, you return to the largest pot, today's main showpiece. It's wide, shallow, perfect for boiling greens and something starchy. You lower in a bundle of beet leaves and chopped leeks, along with a splash of leftover wine that's gone a little vinegary. Good for flavour and for pretending the stew has depth. Steam curls upward, fogging the air with the scent of sharp herbs and yesterday's decisions. You take a breath, letting it fill your nose, your mouth, your lungs. This is the smell of home, of daily life, of things staying mostly in their place. As you stir, the wooden spoon scrapes the bottom in lazy circles. It's chipped at the end from that time your brother used it to scare a snake out of the storeroom. It worked. Sort of. The door creaks, and in walks your uncle grumbling about his hip and the fact that someone fed his breakfast fig to the dog. You smile without turning. He's been making the same complaint for 20 years, even on days when the dog hasn't eaten a thing. He sniffs the air. "Smells like you didn't burn it yet," he says approvingly. "Yet," you echo, and he chuckles, seating himself in the corner where the smoke collects just enough to make his beard smell permanently roasted. The lentils are nearly done. You check the texture. Soft, not mushy, just right. You ladle out a portion into a shallow bowl and sprinkle a few crumbles of dried goat cheese on top. Not much, just enough to give the illusion of abundance. You garnish it with crushed marjoram and a drizzle of oil. Last year's pressing, still good, a little cloudy. There's something satisfying about this. Not just the cooking, but the act of feeding, of turning grains and leaves and odds and ends into warmth and comfort, of making something whole from parts. The hearth isn't just a cooking tool, it's a glue, holding the day together, holding you together. You step back to admire your morning's work. 3 pots, steaming gently, a bowl of lentils, a bundle of greens wilting in the pan, a fresh loaf resting on a reed tray. Not a feast, but not bad either. You remember the time last summer when the fire died completely. Nothing but grey. You had to beg the neighbour's boy to carry a torch from the town altar, and he made sure everyone knew you'd let Hestia's flame go out. Embarrassing. Even worse, the stew that night never tasted quite right. There's a superstition. If you cook without flame from a sacred hearth, your food will betray you. Some say it's nonsense. Others swear by it. You don't take chances anymore. The cat hops onto a stool, tail flicking. The goat bleats from outside, clearly offended by your continued ignorance of its noble presence. The wind shifts, carrying in the smell of baked earth and early figs. The day is still young, the chores still many. But here, at the centre of it all, your hearth pulses gently. Fire and clay, ash and heat, the quiet heart of the house, and you, its keeper, dancing your daily ballet. Graceful, chaotic, perfectly mundane. The fire is steady now, your pots are simmering, and your feet have gone just slightly numb from squatting too long. Perfect timing for the morning offering, one of those tiny daily acts that feels like it matters, even when you're half awake and still wearing yesterday's soot on your cheek. You reach for a small bowl set aside near the hearth, glazed unevenly and chipped at the rim. Inside it goes a handful of barley from this morning's grind. You crush a dried fig between your fingers, sticky and sweet, and add the pulp with a little reverence. A drizzle of olive oil follows, glistening like liquid gold in the firelight. This is for Hestia. She doesn't ask for much, the quietest of the Olympians. No thunderbolts, no wild transformations. Just a whisper of flame, a spoonful of grain, and a household that doesn't burn down. You set the bowl near the edge of the fire where the heat licks but doesn't consume. Smoke rises, gentle, fragrant, respectful. You whisper something. Not a full prayer, just a murmur. More for you than her. It's tradition and comfort and superstition all tangled together like last year's herb strings. Then comes the fragrant herb. You twist a sprig of thyme from your bundle and crush it between your fingers. The scent is sharp, almost medicinal. But was it thyme that Hestia preferred, or rosemary, or maybe something now lost to time entirely? Historians still argue over this, poring through faded texts and temple dedications like culinary detectives. You don't know. You just go with what smells right and hasn't gone stale yet. You toss the herb into the flame, it sizzles briefly, sending up a fragrant puff that mingles with the scent of bubbling lentils and the lingering memory of last night's stew. If you were a goddess, you'd be pleased. With the offering complete, you take a moment to stretch. Your back cracks like a poorly fired clay tile. You shift your weight and glance around the room. Morning sunlight has crept further across the floor, illuminating a line of clay jars, grain, oil, wine, salted fish. A pantry of hope and compromises. You move to the table, a wide slab of wood balanced on uneven legs and burnished smooth by years of elbows and spilled broth. Here comes the daily kneel and sort, seeds, herb scraps, a few olives with one suspiciously soft spot. You pop the good ones into a bowl, the rest? Goat treats. You keep those in a little pouch by the door. Bribery is essential in goat diplomacy. The cat watches you from its perch on a warm stone shelf, tail curled neatly, eyes half-lidded in the most judgmental way possible. You toss it a bit of barley crust. It sniffs, pretends disinterest, then devours it when you look away. Classic. You grab the broom again, making another slow pass around the hearth. Even though you swept earlier, the ash is relentless. It drifts, it clings, it reappears like an unwanted cousin during festival season. You gather a small pile near the doorway and with a smooth, practiced flick, sweep it outside. As you do, a breeze gusts through the open doorway. The ashes stir in a sudden swirl and you wince as a puff of soot smacks you in the face. You sneeze. Twice. The fire pops like it's laughing at you. You compose yourself, wiping your nose on your sleeve like the dignified adult you are. You glance outside. Nothing urgent happening, just the slow stir of village life. A few neighbours carrying baskets, a dog barking at a chicken. Somewhere in the distance, a woman is already shouting about figs, again with the figs. Back inside, you turn your attention to a small ceramic jar tucked in the corner. You lift the lid and peer inside. Honey, not much. Enough for one more sweetener drop, maybe two if you're feeling stingy. You dip a finger in and let a little trail into a cup of warm water steeped with crushed mint leaves. You sip. It's not ambrosia, but it's sweet and soothing, and it makes the smoky air feel just a little gentler. You settle onto the low bench near the hearth and let your legs stretch out. The warmth of the fire kisses your shins. The quiet hum of the household surrounds you. A bubbling pot, the creak of drying herbs, the faint scritch-scratch of the cat sharpening its claws on something it shouldn't. You think about your mother and your grandmother and all the women before you who knelt at this same hearth, sang to the same fire, muttered at the same goats. This flame, passed down like a whispered story, has outlived weddings, births, funerals, political upheavals, and at least 3 kitchen roof collapses. You smile at that. The hearth is the one thing that hasn't changed. The rest of the world might march to war or argue about philosophy under marble columns, but someone's always back here in the kitchen, coaxing flame from ash and offering a pinch of barley to a goddess who never asks for much. You take another sip, savour the sweet warmth and glance at the ceiling. A spider scurries across a beam, its legs moving in precise little steps. You think for a moment of naming it. Maybe later. There's still a day's worth of tasks waiting for you. More sweeping, more chopping, more negotiations with stubborn amphoral. But for now, just this moment, warm toes, steady fire, and the soft glow of thyme-scented smoke rising in lazy ribbons toward the rafters. You lean forward to stir the stew, and the spoon resists. It's sunk into a pocket of lentils as thick as wet plaster. You wiggle it free, give the mixture a few lazy stirs and sigh. It needs thinning. Again. You grab a jug of water from the ledge, pour with a steady hand, and listen to the burble of softening starch. The fire hisses approvingly. Then comes the ritual of rubbing oil into the old bronze pan. You set it aside from the flame and dab a bit of olive oil onto a cloth, what's left from last winter's pressing, sharp on the nose, cloudy around the rim. Not quite rancid, but it has that cheeky tang that says, "Use me now or regret it later." You rub it into the pan's pitted surface like it's an old friend you're trying to keep alive one more day. There's something soothing about this task. Small circles, gentle pressure. The pan warms under your fingers, releasing the ghost of every meal it's ever cooked. Garlic, fish, more garlic, burnt barley from that time you fell asleep during the moon festival. You murmur to it like a spell. Stay strong, hold together, don't embarrass me in front of the neighbours. Next comes the seasoning. Wild thyme crumbled between your palms, a whisper of dried oregano, and a dash of salt from the flat clay dish you keep on a ledge near the cat's preferred nap zone. The smell hits you like a memory. Sun-warmed hillsides, bees drowsy in the thyme bushes, and your uncle trying to impress a shepherd girl by claiming oregano cured baldness. It didn't, still doesn't. You sprinkle the herbs over the stew, and the scent lifts instantly, dancing with the smoke. This is the flavour of home, sharp, earthy, comforting. But not everyone agrees. There's still debate among scholars whether mountain oregano was more prized than thyme in ancient Greek households. Some point to market records from Thasos. Others argue it's all regional bias, with Peloponnesians just being snobby about their seasoning. You swirl the herbs through the stew and set the spoon aside, grabbing a crust of bread to dunk and test. You take a bite. It's not bad. A little bland, but that's what the table herbs are for. You'll fix that later. The cat blinks at you from its perch, as if silently judging your spice ratios. You throw it a bit of fish scrap left from last night, which it sniffs delicately, then devours in 2 bites. No complaints now. You step back to the shelf and check your herb stores. Parsley's low, bay leaves are nearly gone, and there's a suspicious mould growing on the sage bundle that looks like it's developing a personality. You pinch off the salvageable bits and toss the rest into the waste bowl for the goat. You glance toward the doorway, where your neighbour's kid is hovering with a hopeful look and a shallow basket of bruised pomegranates. "Trade?" he asks, eyes darting to the steam curling from your pot. You tilt your head. "Only if they're sweeter than your last ones." "They are," he lies boldly, shoving the basket forward. You sigh, take 2 of the better ones, and hand over a hunk of barley bread smeared with soft cheese. It's not a fair trade, but he's a fast runner, and if you reject him outright, he'll start spreading rumours that your stew smells like burnt sandals again. You roll one of the pomegranates in your hands. The skin is tough, leathery, but the juice inside will be tart and red as a sunset. You set it aside for later. Maybe you'll mix it with honey and warm wine tonight. Just a little treat before bed. Hestia would approve. Probably. You wipe your hands again, this time on a slightly cleaner corner of your apron, and turn back to the fire. You add a small log of olive wood. Dry, cracked, and still scented with oil. It catches quickly. The flames flare, then settle into a slow orange lick. The heat warms your cheeks. You crouch there a moment, enjoying it. Your knees complain. Your back echoes the sentiment. Then something pops, loud and sharp. You duck instinctively, heart leaping. Turns out it's just an olive pit someone tossed into the fire. You exhale hard. The fire, ever dramatic, crackles like it's pleased with the reaction. You retrieve a ceramic plate from the shelf and begin arranging a few side dishes. Pickled onions, a scoop of lentils, some of the fig paste you pressed last week. Still sticky and fragrant. You add a wedge of barley cake and a sprinkle of sesame seeds. A humble meal, but whole, balanced, good. Some days it's enough to put food on a plate without burning your hand or angering the stove spirits. You've done both in the past, often simultaneously. You sit for a moment, legs crossed by the fire, plate in your lap. Outside, the street is alive with familiar sounds. Cartwheels creaking, sandals on stone, someone shouting about lost chickens. Again. You take a slow bite and stare into the flames. They dance in unpredictable rhythms, licking around the base of your pot like lazy snakes. Somewhere, far off, philosophers argue about truth and justice and the nature of the universe. You stir lentils. You rub oil into cracked pans. You scrape burnt bits from the pot with the corner of a flat wooden spoon. And honestly, you wouldn't trade. The morning's cooking is mostly behind you. But now comes the part of the day that requires more diplomacy than seasoning. The neighbours. Because in this corner of the ancient world, the hearth is never truly private. Not when the doors are open, the walls are thin, and everyone within a chicken sprint is convinced your stew smells better than theirs. It starts innocently enough. A soft knock on the frame, followed by the unmistakable shuffle of your neighbour Melita, a woman whose sandals slap the ground like wet laundry. She enters without waiting. Of course she does. Everyone does. She carries a small clay jar wrapped in cloth. "Trade," she says. Holding it out with both hands, you eye it. "What is it?" "Dried apple slices. Almost sweet," she pauses. "Mostly not wormy. Tempting." You glance at your own stash, 2 limp onions and half a jar of pickled leeks. But what catches your attention isn't the fruit. It's the gossip her raised eyebrows promise. You motion to the bench, and she settles in like a queen without a throne. As the fire crackles, the air between you fills with quiet ritual. Bread torn, hands wiped, eyes narrowed in shared understanding. You pour her a ladle of your lentil stew, and she offers the jar in return. It is mostly not wormy. Success. Melita leans in. "You know that priest from the small temple on the hill?" You nod, chewing thoughtfully. He wears robes so bright they can be seen from the next village, and once tripped into a pond during a moon festival. Hard to forget. "Well," she says, eyes sparkling, "he's been seen at the weaver's house. Twice. At night. You raise an eyebrow. Maybe he's ordering a new cloak. He was carrying wine, she sips. The expensive kind. You try to feign disinterest, but it's hard when the fire crackles at just the right moment, like it's in on the drama. You trade gossip like spices, carefully, sparingly, but with just enough flavour to keep things interesting. Someone's cousin is moving to a coastal town. Someone else's amphora cracked mysteriously in the night, which in Melita's opinion is definitely a curse. A new midwife arrived last week, and she swears by garlic poultices and chanting during labour. Your goat is also a topic. Apparently it's been seen trespassing into 3 gardens. You feign shock. Inside you know exactly where it's been, especially since it came back with rosemary in its teeth. You offer Melita a slice of honeyed barley cake. Thinner than usual, but she takes it with a nod of approval. She bites in and chews slowly, then adds, "You know, this is better than last time." You smile. Less ash in this one. She laughs, and her shoulders soften. That's how it works. Food, fire, and a little friendly shade. After Melita leaves, the next visitor is even smaller. A girl from 3 doors down, arms full of mint sprigs and a shy smile. "For your stew," she says. You give her a slice of cheese in return and ruffle her hair. She scampers off before you can remind her not to run with a cooking skewer. Again. These visits aren't planned, they just happen. People pass by, sniff the air and step in. Sometimes they bring herbs or dried figs. Sometimes they want to borrow a spoon. Sometimes they just sit and let the heat of the fire unknot the cold in their shoulders. You remember when old Petros used to come by every week with a different herbal remedy. Most were nonsense, but one time he gave you a salve made of boiled fig leaves and sheep fat that actually cured your cousin's rash. Probably. Could have been coincidence. Could have been Hestia. Or just time. But it smelled awful and worked beautifully, which is basically the hallmark of ancient medicine. As you sit back down by the hearth, you think about how much knowledge moves through kitchens like this, not from scrolls or formal schooling, but in whispers over lentils. How to salt fish properly, how to soothe a colicky baby, why you never let the bread rise too long during a thunderstorm. Historians write about empires, battles, and kings. But this is the real archive. Clay pots, shared spoons, and the memory of who brought you dried apples when your roof leaked. You grab a small scrap of papyrus and make a note. Well, more of a doodle than a note, really. A stick figure holding an amphora next to a goat. It'll make no sense to anyone else, but you'll remember it meant, "Ask Callista if she wants to swap garlic tomorrow." The sun is higher now, light slanting deeper across the kitchen floor. You squint and realise it's almost time for the midday lull, that sacred pause in the day when chores slow, neighbours retreat, and even the animals seem to nap. But before you get there, you have one more guest. A man steps into the doorway, stooped, dusty, with the kind of beard that suggests he's been arguing about philosophy for at least 3 days straight. "Do you have a cool drink?" he rasps. You hand him water in a terracotta cup, cold from the cistern. "Thank you," he says, sipping slowly. "Do you think virtue can exist without moderation?" You blink. "I think you need to sit down." He does. And for the next 10 minutes, you listen to a rambling speech about Plato, the soul, and whether fire is a metaphor for moral clarity or just really useful for lentils. You nod occasionally, refill his cup once, and quietly sprinkle a bit more thyme into the stew. Eventually he thanks you and shuffles out again, mumbling something about duality. You smile to yourself. The hearth welcomes everyone. Gossips, children, philosophers, and the occasional goat. And somehow, you keep them all fed. You wipe your hands on your apron for the 3rd time, mostly out of habit now. The goat is back, of course, and staring into the doorway with the blank intensity of a philosopher stuck on a bad metaphor. You ignore it. You've got dough to wrangle, and not even goat shenanigans can distract you when bread is on the line. You reach for the wide bowl tucked near the hearth. Inside is the mixture you started earlier. Barley flour, a handful of wheat flour, a splurge, a pinch of salt, and water drawn from the cistern before the sun got too high. You drag your fingers through the sticky paste, checking consistency. It clings to your hands like a determined toddler. It's needing time. You push and fold, push and fold. The rhythm of it is baked into your bones. You don't think, you just move. Elbows into it, fingers pressing the air out, dough like a stubborn argument with your aunt. And honestly, Kneading is as close as you get to a workout these days, unless you count chasing after that goat with a broom. Historians still argue over the exact tools used for kneading in ancient Greek kitchens. Some say it was all done by hand on wooden boards or clean clay slabs. Others suggest the use of special round stones, kneading stones, possibly even sacred in some traditions. You look at your battered wooden plank and wonder what future archaeologist will make of its burn marks and wine stains. Once the dough is smooth and elastic, well, elastic-ish, you roll it into 2 flat rounds and set them aside, covering them with a damp cloth. The fire's heat will help it rise a little, but not too much. This isn't festival bread, it's just daily bread, the kind that gets dunked in stew and eaten while standing up between chores. You scoop a few embers from the fire and make a small oven pit near the side of the hearth. A flat stone goes on top, blackened and slightly cracked. Your makeshift griddle. You toss a pinch of flour on it. If it browns but doesn't burn, it's ready. Your internal kitchen oracle gives the go-ahead. You slide the first round of dough onto the hot stone. The sizzle is immediate and satisfying, like applause. The edges puff slightly, the surface bubbles. You resist the urge to press it down with your fingers. It's hot enough to brand you, and you've learned your lesson. Several times. While the bread cooks, you hum a little tune. A lullaby your mother used to sing, one she claimed helped bread rise properly. You're not sure about the science behind it, but you keep singing anyway. Half magic, half habit. The scent starts to rise. Toasty, earthy, warm. The second loaf joins the first, and the two begin their slow transformation from paste to sustenance. You crouch nearby, watching closely. There's a fine line between perfect and charcoal, and this fire doesn't forgive distractions. Meanwhile, the goat has given up trying to guilt you into a snack, and instead plops down just outside the doorway, chewing cud and pretending not to eavesdrop. The first loaf is done. You use a flat wooden paddle to lift it, its bottom crisp and golden, its surface dotted with tiny blisters. You tap it once. Hollow. Perfect. You place it on a woven mat and let it cool while you flip the second one. Just then your cousin arrives, ducking through the doorway with a lazy grin and a bundle of wild greens under his arm. "Want these? Found them by the old well," he says, dropping them on your table like a gift from the gods. Might be edible. You glance at the bundle. Dandelion, maybe some wild fennel, a few things that might be weeds or might be salad, depending on how adventurous you're feeling. "I'll add them to the stew," you say. He grabs a piece of warm bread and takes a bite. His eyes widen. "You didn't burn it." You swat at him with the cloth. "Yet." The two of you sit for a moment in companionable silence, sharing a loaf torn in rough quarters, dipped in lentil broth. The fire crackles. A breeze stirs the herb bundles overhead. Your cousin starts talking about a neighbour's failed attempt to ferment olives using seawater. Apparently it exploded. You're not surprised. As you sip water from a clay cup, you think about the dozens, maybe hundreds of mornings you've done this exact thing. Mix, knead, bake, feed. There's a rhythm to it, like a song no one wrote down but everyone remembers. Some scholars debate whether ancient breads were seasoned or kept plain. You know the answer. It depends on the cook, the day, and whether the goat had raided the herb shelf. Today's loaf is plain. Tomorrow's might get sesame seeds if you remember to ask Melita. You store the second loaf under a cloth, ready for dinner. It'll be tougher by then, but stew softens everything eventually. The cat jumps up onto the table and immediately tries to sit on the bread. You relocate it with a patient sigh. It flicks its tail in a fence and hops down to go nap near the fire. The light shifts, casting golden shadows across the floor. It's not quite midday, not quite late, just that middle stretch of time when everything moves a little slower and no one expects anything of you for about 20 minutes. You lean against the wall, hands warm from the bread, and watch the fire flicker across the clay. In this quiet moment, surrounded by smells and soot and bread and barley and cats, you realise there is no big climax to this work, no grand triumph, just a series of small victories, one unburnt loaf, one balanced stew, one perfectly timed flick of the wrist, and somehow that's enough. The bread is cooling, the fire's in that golden lull between helpful and slightly sleepy, and your stomach is politely nudging you about lunch. But before you serve anything, there's a brief window, rare and glorious, of stillness. The kind of pause that only comes when the morning labour is done but the midday frenzy hasn't yet begun. You take it. You ease yourself onto the low bench by the hearth, legs stretched, back leaning against the wall's sun-warmed clay. A reed mat cushions the spot just enough to keep your tailbone from staging a rebellion. The cat is already curled up beside you, its body a warm, vibrating loaf, paw tucked under its chin like a smug philosopher. You close your eyes. The kitchen breathes. You can hear it, the crackle of logs, the gurgle of stew bubbles, the sigh of wind through the half-open doorway. From the courtyard, a single bee drones past like it's on an errand. Outside, someone sneezes. Farther still, a chorus of chickens hits a collective high note that suggests either an egg has been laid or a minor tragedy has struck. You let your hand rest on the cat's back. It doesn't protest. That's high praise. The sun cuts across the floor in warm slices, dust dancing lazily in its beam. You watch a fleck drift down, land on the lip of a clay jar, then vanish into the shadow. There's no urgency now. The lentils are done. The bread is baked. The wild greens are cleaned and chopped, resting in a small bowl, waiting for their grand entrance into tonight's stew. You could do more, there's always more, but for a few minutes you won't. You think back to when you were smaller, sitting beside your grandmother during these exact moments. She'd stroke your hair with flour-dusted fingers, hum something tuneless, and whisper secrets about how to keep the fire loyal. "Feed it before it's hungry," she said, like a husband or a cat, and never say thank you too loud. The flame gets shy. You smile at the memory. She also said the cat used to be a priest in another life, and the goat was probably a punishment from Hera. Both theories still hold up. Your eyes wander the room. The herb bundles swing gently overhead. Basil, thyme, fennel, and a few strange stragglers you keep because they smell nice, even if no one remembers what they're called. A string of dried figs hangs near the door, and your cousin's pomegranate sits like a ruby on the bench, still unopened. Everything glows in the soft amber light. The fire pops again, but gently, like it's agreeing. This is the hour when time moves like honey, when children nap in cool corners and grown-ups pretend they're just resting their eyes, when even the most zealous town criers give it a rest, and the agora empties out until only the most stubborn philosophers remain, arguing about whether motion is an illusion or just a symptom of poor planning. You hear sandals slap somewhere outside, quick steps. Probably someone late for something, not your concern, not for another 15 minutes. You lean your head back, eyes fluttering closed again. The cat sighs and shifts, curling into the crook of your knee. You're not asleep, but you're not fully awake either, just drifting somewhere between the warmth of the fire and the weightlessness of the breeze. It's during this moment that the thought hits you. What if the real power of the hearth isn't in the cooking or the sacred fire or even the food? What if it's the pause, the way everything centers around this spot? How it draws in noise and releases calm, how it demands nothing but presence. The goat bleats suddenly from outside, as if offended by the silence. You groan softly. So much for transcendence. You rise slowly, knees stiff from the floor. The cat slides off your lap and resumes its mission to nap in the sunniest square of stone it can find. You stretch, arms reaching overhead, back cracking in 5 distinct places. You feel older than the hearth itself for a second. You pad over to the shelf, pour a small cup of watered-down wine and take a slow sip. It's cool, slightly tart, with just enough body to remind you someone stomped grapes for this. Probably barefoot and probably while humming. You raise the cup slightly in mock salute to whoever that was. You grab a bowl and ladle yourself a modest portion of the lentils, now thick and rich and speckled with herbs. You tear a piece of still-warm bread and dunk it, soaking up the broth before taking a bite. It's exactly what it needs to be. Not exquisite, not complex, but full, nourishing, honest. Outside, the breeze picks up. A fig leaf skitters across the threshold like a messenger from the garden. You glance out to the courtyard. The donkey is sleeping. The goat is sulking. A lizard sprints across the wall in a flash of movement that startles you enough to nearly spill your wine. You finish your meal slowly. Bread crust, last bit of stew. Final sip of wine. You wipe your fingers on your apron, then toss the crumbs to the floor where the cat immediately investigates and finds them beneath her dignity. You place the bowl on the ledge for washing later and ease yourself back onto the bench for just another breath, just another moment. You don't have to move yet. The fire is steady, The house is warm, and you, for a rare and fleeting instant, are still. You rise from the bench with the grace of a cart with one wobbly wheel, slow, creaky, and slightly reluctant. The cat gives you a look as if to say, "Again with the movement?" You don't respond. You have cleaning to do. Because as any proper hearthkeeper knows, the fire might be sacred, but the mess it makes definitely isn't. You begin by clearing the table, well, the wide plank of wood you call a table, brushing off flour dust, dried herb stems, and what you suspect is a piece of roasted onion from 2 days ago. You scrape it all into a shallow bowl reserved for compost or goat bribes, depending on the contents. Then comes the water jug. You heft it from its spot near the doorway, the clay cool against your chest. It was filled earlier from the communal cistern, drawn up in squeaking buckets with a rope that frays more every season. You pour carefully into a wide basin, a low, broad clay bowl you use for washing dishes, hands, vegetables, and occasionally your dignity after particularly smoky days. You start with the bronze bowls first. Their curves are smooth, slightly warped from years of use, and the faint greenish patina around the rim tells you they've aged as gracefully as you planned to. You dunk one into the water, swirl it gently, and reach for a scrap of rough linen soaked in seawater and ash. Yes, seawater and ash. It's the ancient version of dish soap. Not particularly glamorous, but effective in its own scrappy way. The ash cuts grease, and the seawater, well, it's free and full of confidence. You scrub the bronze until it glints a little in the sun, revealing the faint hammer marks from whoever made it. Probably decades ago. Possibly while arguing about olive prices or complaining about how young people today don't season their lentils properly. As you clean, your mind drifts. You remember when the bowls were new, given as a gift when your cousin got married. You inherited them when she moved away to Thessaly. She claimed the sea air would heal her migraines. Judging by her letters, it mostly gave her new ones. You don't miss her husband. Next are the amphorae. Tall, stubborn, prone to tipping like drunk philosophers. You rinse their insides with more seawater, swirling it until it sloshes and bubbles. Then you pour it out over the garden patch, where nothing ever grows except a defiant patch of wild onions and that one tragic attempt at fennel. Some say washing vessels with seawater served not just a practical purpose, but a magical one, warding off spoilage, bad luck, or spirits with poor table manners. Others think it was just because it saved fresh water. Historians still argue, of course. Some even suggest there were special chants recited during the washing of sacred cooking tools. You hum a little nonsense melody just in case. Can't hurt. You wipe each bowl dry with the softest bit of cloth you own. An old tunic sleeve, faded to a dusty blue and embroidered long ago with what might have once been a bird. It now looks more like a confused cucumber. You pretend it's still a bird. You stack the clean bowls on a shelf above the hearth, where the residual heat will dry them completely. Below them, you arrange your spoons, your cups, your tiny clay jar of salt that you once dropped and glued back together with pine resin. You can still see the crack, but it holds, like you. You pause to clean the fire ring. This is the dirtiest part of the day. You take the iron rake, the handle wrapped in worn cloth, and begin to pull the ashes forward. You gather the old, cooled grey into a heap, separating the soft powder from the stubborn, blackened chunks of wood. Some still warm, some clinging to their purpose with the tenacity of overcooked lentils. You dump the ash into a clay pot kept just for this. It'll be used later for cleaning, or mixed into compost, or given to your aunt, who claims ash keeps snails out of her vegetable patch. You don't ask questions. She also talks to her onions. With the ash cleared, the fire looks satisfied, like a dog after a bath. A little startled, but grateful. You brush your hands off and look around. There's soot under your nails, flour in your hair, and a smudge across your cheek you won't discover until your cousin points it out during dinner. But the space is clean again. Order has been restored. The hearth, fed and tended, hums with a quiet, glowing dignity. It's funny, you think. So many of these rituals feel ancient even as you perform them, like echoes from before your time, and yet they're yours now, in your hands, daily, meaningful. You wipe down the stone ledge with a wet cloth. You sweep the stray lentils into the compost bowl. You tuck the remaining bread under a cloth to keep it from going stale before evening. And just before you step outside to shake the cloth clean in the breeze, you pause at the doorway. The sun has shifted again, lower now, casting longer shadows across the courtyard. The goat has fallen asleep in a position that looks anatomically impossible. The donkey snores like a sighing bellows. Somewhere down the road, someone's shouting about a dropped amphora. You can almost hear the clay crack from here. You turn back, take one last look at the hearth, and smile. It's warm, it's waiting, and it's ready for whatever comes next. You ease back into the kitchen, shaking soot from your fingertips, your apron flapping a little in the afternoon breeze. The fire's glow has dimmed to a cozy core, and now it's time for one of the most deceptively simple tasks: feeding it. You'd think it's as easy as tossing in a few twigs, giving it a pat on the head, and calling it a day. But no, the fire is picky. The fire has moods. You crouch beside the hearth, gathering a few carefully dried laurel branches. Not too thick, not too green, not too brittle. Laurel is your favourite. It burns hot, smells like a forest with ambition, and supposedly brings good luck. Or at least it doesn't make the bread taste like burning chair leg, which is more than you can say for fig wood. You slide the branches into the glowing embers, careful not to smother the fire with too much enthusiasm. The flames pause, then lick upward with slow confidence, curling around the laurel leaves and releasing a fragrant, spicy scent that clings to the air. It smells like afternoon, like patience, like smoke you'll definitely be scrubbing out of your tunic later. There's something sacred about this moment. You're not just burning fuel, you're making an offering. Again and again. Every branch is a promise. I'll keep you alive if you keep me warm. Some say the laurel tree was sacred to Apollo, not Hestia, but you suspect she appreciated it too. Any goddess who presided over hearths probably had a soft spot for branches that didn't spit sap all over your floor. You adjust the log pile beside the fire, pine on the bottom, olive in the middle, laurel for now. A neat little wood stack, as proud and pointless as organising your sock drawer. But you do it anyway. You stretch out your legs, lean back on your hands and bask in the warmth. The flames crackle, sending up a stray spark or two. One lands on your sleeve. You flick it away. Casually, like you do this all the time, which you do. Feeding the fire is about timing, you think. Add too much too soon and it chokes. Wait too long and it sulks. It's a relationship, a very flammable one. You stir the coals with the iron poker, exposing the brighter embers underneath. Little bursts of red light wink up at you. They're alive, those embers. You can feel their tiny pulses under your hand when you hover close. They hum, almost like they're whispering something important but slightly passive-aggressive. You pause to scratch your ankle. A fine layer of ash seems to be forming on every inch of your exposed skin. You look like you've been rolling around in philosophical arguments. Speaking of which, a voice calls from outside, your cousin again, sounding winded. "Do you have more laurel?" he shouts from the courtyard. "No," you shout back. "You burned it all making that ceremonial torch for the solstice." "I told you it was symbolic." "It was smoking." He mutters something about symbolism and vanishes. You toss another laurel twig into the fire and it flares with approval. You take this time to clean the fire tools, the long spoon, the hook, the poker. You wipe them down with a rag dipped in olive oil and vinegar, partly to keep the rust away, partly because your aunt swears the vinegar drives away hearth spirits that cause pots to crack. Do you believe her? Not entirely. But since you started wiping things with vinegar, you've had fewer exploded lentils and fewer pots that mysteriously develop hairline fractures. Coincidence? Maybe, but also maybe not. Historians still argue whether tools like yours were standardised or homemade, ceremonial or purely practical. Judging by the uneven bend in your hook and the accidental heart shape on your fire spoon, a carving gone wrong, you're voting for homemade. You place the clean tools beside the hearth and check the edges of the fire pit. A few stray ashes have blown out and are beginning to mark the stone floor in soft grey fingerprints. You sweep them back in with a flick of your fingers, like pushing sleeping puppies back into a basket. The warmth curls up around your ankles, climbs your spine, and nestles behind your eyes. You blink slowly. There's a rhythm here. Ember, breath, motion. Fire demands your attention but rewards your care. It's needy, but fair. You consider adding another log but decide against it. It's steady now, glowing, pulsing, content. No need to poke it just for the sake of action. You sit back and look around the room. The herb bundles sway gently in the heat. The bread is tucked away. The bowls are clean. The goat is not in the kitchen, which is a small miracle. The fire burns on, not dramatic, not explosive, just warm, constant, yours. You smile, brush a smear of ash off your cheek and whisper a little "thank you" to the flames. Not loudly, of course. You remember what your grandmother said. The fire gets shy. The room is thick with the scent of simmering broth and singed laurel. Your signature aroma at this point, a blend of comfort and mild peril. You stir the pot again, not because it needs it, but because it gives your hands something to do while your nose does the real work. The smells of the kitchen are different now, deeper, rounder. By midday, the fire has cooked its way into everything. The clay walls, the bread, your hair. The aroma of lentils laced with garlic rises from the pot. There's the tang of vinegar-soaked herbs, a trace of olive oil warming on the stone tray, and just at the edges the faint smoky hint of charred fig leaves from earlier. It's an orchestra of scent, and you're the conductor with soup-stained sleeves. You taste a spoonful from the pot. Needs salt. You pinch a bit from your cracked clay jar and toss it in, watching the crystals melt instantly into the bubbling liquid. Then a splash of wine for depth. Yesterday's batch, a little sour but still worthy of being called a cooking ingredient. The steam carries everything upward. Garlic, onion, that slightly funky tang of soft goat cheese dissolving into the broth. And underneath it all, the quiet backbone of barley just doing its job without fuss. Your stomach growls in approval. You're not alone. The cat lifts its head, sniffs the air with a regal squint, then flops back down like it's judging you for not seasoning faster. You reach for the small basket of greens on the table. Wild dandelion, a few fennel sprigs, and something your cousin insists is edible. You tear them up, drop them in, and stir until the greens swirl like seaweed in a warm tide. Every day your kitchen smells a little different, depending on what you've got and what the goat hasn't stolen. Sometimes sharp and sour, vinegar and pickled turnips, sometimes rich and earthy, roasted barley, ground chickpeas, or lentils so old they deserve honorary citizenship. And sometimes odd. Like that one day the neighbour brought you a fish wrapped in damp myrtle leaves and insisted it would transform the stew. It did, into something that tasted like regret and moss. You lean over the pot and inhale deeply. This one though, this is right. There's a reason cooks say, watch the smell. Not the time, not the recipe, the smell. That's the true measure of readiness. And as you lift the lid from the second pot, your humble experiment with leftover beans, onions and fig paste, you're met with a soft cloud of steam that makes your eyes water, your nose tingle, and your soul feel gently hugged. Not that every smell in here is delicious. The fire has its own way of contributing, mostly with smoke that seeps into fabrics and never leaves. The ceiling is faintly stained from it, and the rafters have started to adopt a rich toasted personality. Historians still debate how ancient Greek kitchens handled smoke. Some argue that carefully designed airflow systems, open eaves, roof holes, helped guide it out. Others suggest people just got used to the haze, occasionally waving a stick in the air like they were chasing off invisible bees. You're firmly in the latter camp. You've mastered the art of standing exactly where the smoke almost misses your face. Almost. You step outside for a moment, letting the breeze carry some of the indoor steam away. Your neighbour, Melita, is dragging a basket of unripe pears past the doorway. Your kitchen smells better than mine, she mutters, without stopping. You smile. You say that every day, she shrugs. Still true. Back inside, the fire pops. A laurel twig cracks in half and startles the cat into changing nap positions. You grab a scrap of cheesecloth and fan the room, wafting the scent toward the door like it's an offering to passing spirits or nosy neighbours. Food has a way of spreading the news faster than any gossip. You once made honey cakes that drew in 4 children, 2 goats, and one suspicious-looking priest from down the road, who just happened to be in the neighbourhood. You ladle a bit of the stew into a shallow bowl, garnish it with a sprinkle of chopped mint and a swirl of oil, and place it on the ledge to cool. It sits there like a painting. Green, gold, steam rising in lazy spirals. You lean on your elbows and admire it. Not bad, considering you almost spilled half the lentils into the fire pit this morning. The smells deepen as the sun moves. Afternoon heat brings out the sharper notes. The vinegar, the roasted garlic, the caramelized onion crust on the bottom of the pot. You meant to do that, obviously. The bread, wrapped in cloth near the hearth, still carries a trace of burnt barley. Not too much, just enough to make it rustic. That's your story, and you're sticking to it. And now, the mystery smell. You sniff again. Something off. Not bad, just unexpected. You search around. Is it the herb bundle? The old fig pot? You lift a lid, recoil slightly. Ah. The goat got into the pickle brine again. You make a note to move it, again, and light a sprig of dried rosemary to reset the scent balance. The rosemary crackles like dry parchment and releases a burst of sharp, piney perfume that curls through the kitchen. It layers itself over everything, not to mask but to meld. Now the room smells less like lunch and more like legend. You close your eyes for a moment. The scent transports you to open hills, to early summer festivals, to the one time your cousin dropped a full amphora of wine and blamed it on divine intervention. It didn't work, but it smelled amazing for a week. You open your eyes again, take one last sniff, and let out a satisfied sigh. You've stirred, chopped, salted, and stoked your way to this moment. The kitchen hums with readiness. The fire is calm, the cat is purring. The goat is, mercifully, not indoors. And the smells? The smells are singing. With the stew mellowing and the fire relaxed into a low, even burn, it's time to turn your attention to a different kind of meal, one not meant for you. You reach for a simple wooden tray kept tucked near the hearth, smoothed by years of handling and slightly warped at one corner. This is your offering board. Not the fancy kind they have at the temple with polished marble and gilded bowls. Just yours, stained with oil, shadowed with soot, and quietly sacred. You gather what's needed, a pinch of barley from the jar, a sliver of cheese that hasn't gone completely adventurous, and a slice of bread from this morning's batch. You set each item on the tray carefully, like arranging pieces in a quiet game. Then, for good measure, you add a few pomegranate seeds. They glisten like little rubies, and even though they're more Aphrodite's territory, they give the whole thing a bit of flair. The pantheon is always watching, or eavesdropping, or loitering just out of sight waiting for snacks. You place the tray on a low stone shelf beside the hearth, your household shrine. It's nothing grand, a tiny clay figure with softened features, a carved olive wood spoon placed behind her like a scepter, and a few burned incense cones that now look like worried beetles. But this is Hestia's spot, her quiet throne. No thunderbolts, no tragic love affairs, just presence and fire. You whisper a quick invocation under your breath, part thanks, part daily report. The stew's edible, the fire's steady, no goat inside today. A win all around. You light a little curl of dried myrtle and place it beside the offering. The scent is soft and earthy, like crushed leaves and distant rainfall. It curls through the kitchen air and mingles with the steam from the pot, the smoke from the hearth, and the perpetual perfume of barley and oil. A domestic incense. The offering is small, but that's the point. This isn't about extravagance, it's about rhythm. The daily act of remembering the gods as you stir the stew or mop the ash. It's said that Hestia was always given the first portion of every meal, not because she demanded it, but because she kept the fire that made the meal possible. You sit beside the hearth, eyeing the flame, feeling it warm your shins. You think about how other households across the village and beyond are doing the same thing. Different trays, different prayers, same fire. It's humbling, really. You're not just feeding the gods. You're joining a conversation that's been going on for generations, quietly, over soup. You glance at the offering tray again and wonder if Hestia ever gets bored of barley. Maybe she dreams of wild honey or pomegranate cakes. Maybe she's just grateful no one tried to offer her raw onions again. That was a choice. You add a few mint leaves at the last moment. Fresh, bright, a little flourish to say, I tried. Then comes the bit that's harder to explain. The internal pecking order. Because Hestia isn't the only one hovering near your hearth. You take another small plate and place a few olives, a drop of wine, and a smudge of goat cheese on it. This one's for Hermes, just in case he's around, sneaking messages under doorways or poking through pantries for fun. You nod toward the back wall where you've tucked a little clay-winged sandal, your informal shrine to him. It's chipped, it wobbles, but it makes people laugh when they spot it, and that seems entirely appropriate. And then, just then, you consider Aphrodite. Because while the hearth is Hestia's and the errands are Hermes's, the love drama definitely lives somewhere in your kitchen. You've seen the way Melita talks about that fig vendor. You've heard your cousin sigh at the moon like it owes him an apology. There's something stewing in more than your pots, and you suspect Aphrodite is behind it. So you pour a thimble of wine and leave it in the sunny corner near the windowsill, a nod to love, indulgence, and poetic messes. You're not hedging your bets, you're just extending hospitality. As you lean back, you think about how many offerings are made each day, across villages, across generations, some with great ceremony, some, like yours, with a cracked tray and the hope that a pomegranate seed doesn't roll off and attract ants. Historians still debate whether these household offerings were purely symbolic or deeply felt acts of devotion, whether families believed in literal divine presence or just honoured tradition to keep the peace with their ancestors. Honestly, you think it doesn't matter, because when you light the myrtle, when you set out the barley, when you whisper thanks to the quiet flame, something shifts. The kitchen feels complete, anchored, witnessed. You brush your hands on your apron and check the pot one more time. The stew's thickened just enough to hold its shape in the ladle. You stir, taste, nod. A few more minutes, then it'll be perfect. The offering tray still sits on the ledge, gently steaming, a little shine of oil catching the light. The gods, if they're paying attention, haven't said a word. But that's Hestia's way. No miracles, no messages, just warmth. The air hums with a quiet expectancy. It's not just any day, it's almost festival day, which means the regular rhythm of cooking and tending has to make room for something slightly more dramatic. Fire for ceremony. You crouch by the hearth, coaxing the flames higher, feeding it with dry pine and slender olive branches. You want it lively but not unhinged. A ceremonial flame should glow, not explode. Outside you can hear the sounds of people gathering. Someone's tuning a lyre badly. Children shriek in delight. Or chaos, it's hard to tell. A donkey brays like it's offering commentary. Festival preparations always hover somewhere between a sacred rite and a garden variety panic attack. You set aside your regular cooking tools and reach for the festival torches. They're made from long sticks wrapped in old cloth soaked in oil and resin. Not exactly elegant, but they burn bright, smell like the inside of a forest, and drip dangerously if held at the wrong angle. You learned that the hard way. You light the first torch from the hearth with a steady hand, whispering a little blessing as the cloth catches. The flame leaps up, not violent but eager. It's a good sign. You light the others in sequence and set them in their clay holders to await the procession. You'll carry one to the altar later, maybe hand another off to your cousin if he doesn't trip over his tunic again like last year. It's hard to describe what a hearthkeeper feels during a festival. You're not the star of the show. That's for priests and lyre players and whoever gets picked to wear the laurel crown this year. But the flame? That's yours. And today, it moves from your humble hearth into the wider world, carried through the village like a quiet, glowing secret. The stew is simmering for later, but for now, you're prepping a few simple dishes for the early arrivals. You slice figs, smear them with goat cheese, and press crushed walnuts on top. You skewer olives with dried rosemary stems and arrange them on a flat clay tray. It's not a banquet, but it'll keep hands busy and mouths full long enough to delay more political debates. And yes, there will be debates. There always are. You remember last year's harvest feast, when your uncle tried to recite a poem about Demeter's generosity and ended up insulting 3 farmers and 1 travelling bard? There was stew on the ceiling. The bard left early. The stew took longer to clean. You hope this year goes smoother. You prep another tray of bread slices with herbed oil and dried mint. The scent drifts up, sharp and fresh, grounding. Outside, someone starts singing, off-key, enthusiastic, probably holding wine. You smile and continue arranging the food. There's always a strange energy on festival day. Excitement, nerves, that low, buzzing anticipation that even the goats seem to pick up on. Yours is already pacing the courtyard like it's been elected master of ceremonies. The children burst in first, wild-eyed, slightly sticky, carrying armfuls of laurel branches and requests. Can we light one now? No. Why not? Because last year you set your sister's hair on fire. It grew back, you narrow your eyes, out. They scamper off, dragging the laurel behind them like miniature forest spirits. You check the torches again, still steady, still safe. You place a small bowl of salt water nearby, an old habit passed down from your grandmother, who claimed it calms unruly fire. You're not sure that's true, but it gives you something to do with your hands while the tension simmers. You hear the lyre again, this time accompanied by a flute. The festival's picking up. People are gathering. You feel that flutter of nervous energy in your stomach, the same one you get before flipping bread or tasting a stew you've been adjusting all morning. This is the part that historians never quite capture, the feeling of a village waking up into ceremony. Not the official rituals or sacrifices, but the buzz, the food, the quiet glances shared over firelight and fig slices, the joy and disorder that comes when you feed people and set things on fire in public. You take your torch and step outside. The wind has settled. The air is thick with the sense of roasting meat, crushed herbs and wood smoke. Children dart between adults. People wear their cleanest tunics, or just the least stained, and someone is already swaying to the music. You see your cousin balancing a pot on his head for reasons unclear, and your neighbour trying to outshine everyone with a garland that is mostly weeds. You walk to the main square, torch held high. Others join you, their own flames flickering. Together you light the ceremonial altar fire, a taller stack of branches and old wood arranged with more optimism than structural integrity. The flames leap upward and the crowd cheers. And just like that, the hearth has left the home. Well, not entirely. Back in your kitchen, the original fire still burns, waiting. You'll return to it soon, tend it again, feed it leftovers from the feast, and whisper your thanks for not accidentally setting anyone's tunic on fire today. For now, you enjoy the festival as only a cook can, standing near the food, holding a cup of warm wine, and secretly judging how others flavour their lentils. You take a deep breath of smoke, herbs, and anticipation. The flame is alive. The people are fed. Let the chaos begin. The smell of smoke still clings to your tunic as you trudge back from the village square. Your arms sore from carrying that ceremonial torch, and your ears ringing faintly from what could generously be described as music. The festival is in full swing behind you. Dancers swaying near the bonfire, old men arguing about barley yields, children running in circles, absolutely sugar drunk on honey figs. But back at home, something's wrong. You feel it the moment you step through the door. It's quiet, still, too still. You glance at the hearth, dark, no glow, no ember, no smoke. Your breath catches. The fire is out. A few grey specks sit where the embers should be, mocking you in their cool silence. You crouch down, poke the ashes. Nothing. Not a single coal alive beneath the dust. Just cold memory. You whisper a word that your grandmother definitely wouldn't have approved of. It's not just a practical issue, it's a spiritual disaster. Hestia's fire isn't meant to die. The hearth is sacred. Letting the flame go out, especially during a festival, is like dropping the family heirloom in the chamber pot. Twice. You start scrambling. You grab the fire sticks, a pinch of dry barley straw, a scrap of last year's olive pressing byproduct, anything flammable. You strike the flint. Once, twice. A few sparks fly, bounce on the straw, and vanish. You curse again. Quietly, respectfully. Just enough to let the universe know you're upset, but not enough to risk divine lightning. You blow gently on the pile, willing it to glow. It doesn't. You poke, rearrange, try again. Still nothing, and then it hits you. You have to go get a flame. You can't cheat it. Not with some emergency torch from the back room. Not with sun-warmed twigs. You have to fetch sacred fire from someone whose hearth is still burning. Which means walking across the village during the festival, carrying your empty torch like a badge of shame. You groan and stand up, brushing ash off your knees. You wrap the torch cloth, grab a clay lamp and head back outside. The noise hits you like a wave. Music, laughter, the clatter of sandals, someone shouting about a spilled wine jug. You spot Melita almost instantly. Her torch is still lit. Her face glows smug in the firelight. "Don't say anything," you mutter. She grins. "Your fire died." "I said don't..." "Oh, I won't say anything, except maybe to everyone." You glare at her. She just tilts the torch and lights yours without breaking eye contact. "There," she says sweetly. "Try not to trip on the way home." Again. You grit your teeth, nod, and turn around, carefully shielding the new flame with your hand. The walk back feels twice as long. Every child seems twice as loud. Someone yells, "She's relighting," like it's a competitive sport. By the time you reach your doorway, you're hot, flustered, and 10 seconds away from relocating to a cave. But the flame is still alive. You kneel, lower the torch to the hearth, and coax it gently to life. A few dried twigs catch first, then the straw, then, thank the gods, the log. The flame rises, you exhale. And then, because this is your life, the goat strolls in and immediately sneezes directly into the fire pit. You wave it away with your apron and mutter a few more borderline blasphemous things under your breath. Still, the flame lives, and with it, your dignity, mostly. You sit back on your heels and watch it grow. The orange light returns to the walls, flickering across the amphorae and the bundles of herbs. The kitchen breathes again. There's an old superstition that when a hearth fire dies during a festival, it means someone in the household hasn't paid enough attention to the gods, or to their chores, or possibly to the neighbour's fig tree they definitely borrowed from without asking. Historians still argue whether that belief had roots in actual religious law, or was just a convenient way for old women to guilt their nieces into tending the hearth more carefully. You choose to believe the latter. The fire settles into a steady crackle. You add a few sprigs of bay and crushed fennel, letting the scent rise and cover the embarrassment of earlier. You pour yourself a cup of watered wine, sit cross-legged beside the hearth, and raise it slightly. To perseverance, you whisper, and not yelling at your goat in front of witnesses. The cat wanders in and curls beside the fire, giving you a look that says, "I knew you'd mess it up eventually." You sip your wine and toss a fig into your mouth. Sweet, sticky, perfect. And as the flame glows strong and steady once more, you remind yourself that it's not about never failing. It's about relighting the fire, every time. The fire is back, glowing, crackling, fully alive. You sit beside it, nursing a slight bruise to your pride and a cup of watered wine that's more water than wine. But still, it's something. The hearth sighs, like it's relieved you finally got your act together. You can almost hear Hestia herself whispering, "Took you long enough. Time to get back to the business of feeding people." You lean over and check the stew. The lentils are hanging in there, a little dry at the edges but still salvageable. You add a splash of water, a pinch of salt, and stir it slowly, letting the fire's heat creep back into the mixture. A lazy bubble surfaces, followed by another. The kitchen smells like roasted garlic, bay leaf, and redemption. As the stew thickens, you reach for the wild greens your cousin brought earlier. You toss them in without ceremony. They're slightly wilted but still edible, just like your social reputation after that public torch walk. You've spent so many afternoons like this, crouched by the hearth, stirring something that looks questionable but will probably taste fine. You hum a quiet tune, the same one your grandmother used to sing when the fire was behaving and the goat hadn't eaten anything critical. The cat stretches and yawns, sauntering over to inspect your work. It sniffs the stew, sneezes once and flops dramatically onto your lap, apparently satisfied. You stir with one hand and scratch behind its ears with the other. Balance. You ladle a bit into a small bowl and give it a taste. Still warm, savoury, comforting. The greens add a bit of bitterness, the garlic rounds it out, and the lentils, those stubborn little things, carry everything with their quiet, mushy dignity. Some say food tastes better when cooked over a sacred flame. Others say that's nonsense. Historians still argue over whether flavour differences came from the fire itself, the clay pots, or just centuries of nostalgia. You're leaning toward it's all in the love, and the salt. Definitely the salt. You set the bowl aside to cool and start prepping the next meal. Yes, already. Hearth life doesn't wait. You take a bundle of dried chickpeas and pour them into a flat dish. They clatter like a handful of pebbles. You'll soak them overnight, crush them into paste tomorrow, and maybe fry them if the oil holds out. Or boil them if it doesn't. Chickpea surprises. Everyone's favourite. You rinse out the used pot with warm water and a bit of ash. The fire's heat helps loosen what's stuck. You scrape gently, not wanting to damage the clay. These pots aren't immortal, after all. You've patched this one 3 times. The cracks are sealed with a mix of resin and crushed eggshell, an old trick your aunt swears by. It holds, mostly. You set the pot to dry on the hearth's ledge and take a moment to just breathe. The sun is dipping now, casting long, slanted shadows across the floor. The light dances across the wall, catching on the edges of the hanging herb bundles. It's that golden hour, the one where everything feels possible, or at least tolerable. You lean back on your elbows, stretch your legs, and let the fire warm your toes. The goat bleats from somewhere just outside. You ignore it, for now. Dinner will be simple. Lentil stew, barley bread, a few olives, and that one wedge of cheese that's been hiding behind the vinegar jug for 3 days. If no one sniffs it too closely, it'll be fine. Your cousin drifts in, face flushed from dancing, tunic slightly singed. "Fire's back, I see," he says, smirking. Didn't even panic, you lie smoothly. He grabs a piece of bread, dunks it in the stew and nods. Tastes like victory. Tastes like laurel and desperation. Same thing. You both laugh, and the cat huffs, clearly unimpressed. Dinner is casual, eaten cross-legged by the fire shared between whoever drifts in. A neighbour's child, half asleep from dancing, accepts a bowl with a sleepy thank you. Someone's uncle stops by to borrow salt and stays for 2 helpings and a nap. The fire crackles, casting soft light on tired faces and empty bowls. The stew pot is nearly scraped clean. The breadbasket has more crumbs than content, and yet everyone seems full. There's something magical about this moment, not in a mythic way. No glowing omens or divine pronouncements. Just warmth, company, a full belly, the scent of herbs lingering in the air, the feeling of a day well survived, and a hearth still burning. You sit back, shoulders heavy but heart light. The fire dances on, needing only the smallest nudge to keep going. It's not glamorous, it's not heroic, but it is everything. You're not sure exactly when everyone trickled in, but by the time the last spoon scrapes the stew pot, the house is full of people, noise, crumbs, and that golden flickering light only a well-fed hearth can cast. You pass around the last wedges of barley bread, now a little dry at the edges. No one complains. Bread's bread. And if you eat it with enough lentils and a hint of attitude, it still feels like a feast. Someone brings out a jug of wine. Not the good stuff. The good stuff was probably used up by the second torchlighting at the festival. But this wine is drinkable. Mostly. You water it down, pass it around, and remind your cousin not to toast too enthusiastically unless he wants another pot broken like last time. The cat still hasn't forgiven him for that. You sit by the hearth, legs tucked under you, bowl in hand. The firelight paints everyone in warm, fluttering hues. Gold, rust, a hint of shadow. It makes the amphorae look like sleeping giants, and your cousin's tunic look cleaner than it really is. Dinner, like everything by the fire, is communal. You pass the bread, someone else refills the cups, and every few minutes someone starts a story that turns into a debate that turns into a story again. You love this part. The shared spoon. Passed hand to hand with easy grace. The open palms. The unspoken agreement that the last fig slice should go to whoever looks the most tired. Tonight it's your neighbour's eldest son, who's been herding goats all day and now eats like he's making up for lost time. You scrape the last bits of lentil from the pot and offer the spoon to your cousin. He grins. Divine. Divine because I stirred it with sacred sarcasm, you say. The table laughs. The fire cracks. The cat shifts in its sleep, and still there's always one more person. Your aunt appears at the door, wrapped in a shawl that smells like mint leaves and stern opinions. "You fed everyone?" she asks. "Only the hungry ones." She eyes the empty pot, the half-eaten olives, the general state of crumbs, and nods. Then she takes the only remaining stuffed fig leaf and eats it like she planned it that way all along. Your cousin begins recounting a version of the festival torchlighting that is absolutely inaccurate, but far more entertaining. Apparently you heroically fended off a wild goat, stumbled into the temple courtyard, and lit the flame using nothing but sheer willpower and a slightly damp sandal. You correct none of it. Let the myth grow. The fire pops again, louder this time. A spark jumps up, dances in the air, then disappears. You lean forward to feed it one more small laurel branch. It catches quickly, and the scent is instantly familiar, sharp, clean, sacred. Across the hearth, someone says, "This is the best meal I've had since last solstice." You shrug, but inside you glow. You gather the empty bowls, stacking them with a clatter that feels oddly satisfying. Your cousin helps, wiping each one with a scrap of cloth. You rinse them with warm water, swish, dry, and return them to the shelf like trophies. And then comes the real moment of truth. Who gets the last slice of bread? You hold it up, wave it in the air. Who's still hungry? The cat lifts its head. You throw it in the cat's direction. It lands on the floor. The cat inspects it with the solemn intensity of a temple priest, then begins nibbling ever so daintily. You all agree it's fair. Someone starts humming a tune. Old, wordless, the kind that people claim they forgot but always seem to remember by the third note. Another voice joins in, then another. It becomes a soft chorus, wrapped around the crackling of the fire, the clink of cups, the subtle creak of the wooden shelf holding your lopsided amphora. This is why you tend the hearth. Not for praise, not even for piety, but for this moment, this fullness, this quiet shared spell. The stories drift now, like smoke. Your cousin tells one about a pot that wouldn't boil unless sung to. Your neighbour swears she saw Hestia's face in the steam of a barley stew. Someone else confesses they once fell asleep during a festival speech and woke up with a chicken on their chest. You sit back watching everyone from the hearth's edge. Your fire is low but alive. It glows across tired feet, wine-splashed tunics, fingers curled around cups. You rest your chin on your hands and let the scene wash over you. You didn't plan a feast, you didn't host a festival, but somehow by tending flame and sharing stew, you made a gathering happen. The room is quieter now. The bowls are stacked, the bread is gone, and the wine is down to a lazy drip in the bottom of a clay jug. Most of the guests have drifted back to their own hearths. A few linger, sprawled like contented cats across benches, cushions, or the patch of floor nearest the fire. You begin your favourite part of the evening, the after-feast ritual. Not the religious kind, not the sacred chants or elaborate libations. This is a different kind of ceremony, more broom than blessing. You grab the old hearth rake from its hook, the wood worn smooth from generations of hands. You begin gently pulling the ash forward, sweeping the coals into a tidy pile. The embers glow orange-red under the white powder, like secrets hiding under dust. You work slowly, carefully. This isn't just cleanup. It's part of the conversation with the fire. You've given it fuel, attention, breath. Now you help it settle down. As you move the ash, you find a few artifacts from today's work. Half a charred olive pit, a twisted laurel twig that refused to burn, and something that might have once been part of a barley cake before someone knocked it off the hearth ledge with a robe hem. You set these discoveries aside in a small bowl, your informal archaeological finds collection. It already holds bits of broken spoon, the corner of a burned fig leaf, and the tiny shell of a snail that made the mistake of living near the firewood pile. One day, someone will dig up this house and try to decode these items like a sacred mystery. They'll write scholarly papers on whether the presence of half-scorched olive pits indicates religious ritual or just a clumsy cousin. You gently scatter a new layer of fine ash across the coals, like tucking them in for the night. This will keep the fire smouldering until morning, saving you the agony of flint and kindling and muttered curses before breakfast. As you stand, brushing ash from your palms, you glance around the room. It's a mess, a glorious one. Empty plates, crumbs, a tipped-over stool, a pillow someone mistook for a goat and kicked halfway under the table. You make a mental note to deal with it in the morning, which is exactly how you deal with most of your problems these days. You light a small oil lamp, set it on the table, and blow out the other flames one by one. The room dims to a soft glow. The fire's orange heart flickers. The smoke drifts upward and clings to the rafters like lazy ghosts. You open the door for a moment, letting in the cool night air. It brushes against your arms, lifts your hair, and carries out the scent of dinner, garlic, lentils, wine, smoke. Somewhere out there, a night bird sings. Somewhere closer, your goat makes a sound like it's discovered something deeply offensive in the garden. You close the door. That's tomorrow's problem. You gather a few scraps for compost, olive pits, herb stems, and the one fig slice that fell between the cushion and the floor. You toss it all into a clay bowl and set it near the doorway. The goat will find it. It always does. The cat stirs, stretches, and follows you with half-lidded eyes as you begin folding cloths, covering jars, stacking cups. The kitchen shrinks into its nighttime form, tucked in, dimmed down, still warm. You kneel once more beside the hearth, giving the coals one final glance. They glow slow and steady like a heartbeat, like a promise. And you think, what a strange little life this is. Every day, 1,000 gestures that no one notices, stirring, sweeping, feeding, folding. And yet, they hold the house together. Not the walls, not the roof, the fire, the spoon, the rhythm. Your grandmother used to say, a hearthkeeper doesn't just cook, she anchors the world. You didn't understand it then. You thought she was being poetic. Now, kneeling in the soft glow of a sleeping hearth, you start to believe she might have meant it. You rise, knees creaking, and stretch. The night is deep now, painted in indigo and silence. A few stars blink through the smoke hole above the hearth. You think you see a shooting star, but it might just be soot drifting lazily upward. As you start to leave the room, your foot knocks against something hard. You bend down and pick up a small shard of amphora. You recognize it immediately. It's from the jar that cracked 2 weeks ago when your cousin tripped over the goat during the great olive oil incident. You hold it up, turning it over in the low light. It's utterly useless, but it makes you smile. You place it on the ledge next to your bowl of half-burned fines. Who knows? Maybe the gods appreciate a sense of humour. You don't so much walk to your bed as drift. The fire behind you hums in low ember glow, and the kitchen breathes in its slow, smoky rhythm. It's not entirely silent. There's always one last crackle from a log, one faint sigh of wind through the window, one goat thump against the courtyard wall as it settles in its own bizarre nest. But the world feels quieter, softer. You step through the sleeping room and lay your hand on the woven reed mat that counts as a bed. It's not fancy. It creaks when you shift too quickly, the straw pillow smells like last summer's hay cart, and the blanket has more patches than a politician's story. But it's yours. You lower yourself slowly, every joint voicing mild protest. You're still in your tunic, that's fine. Changing would require standing again, and you're done with ambition for the day. You hear soft footsteps, padded, delicate. The cat. Without even asking permission, it climbs atop your legs, circles 3 times in that ceremonial feline way, and flops down heavily across your shins. It's warm, vibrating faintly, and deeply judgmental. You adjust a corner of the blanket over it, knowing full well it will reject this within minutes, but still. Your body aches in all the usual places, shoulders from hauling pots, knees from squatting by the fire, forearms from kneading bread like you were wrestling a barley deity. But the ache is the good kind, the earned kind, like the sting of wood smoke in your eyes after a full day of feeding people and keeping flames alive. You lie still, eyes half closed, the firelight flickering gently across the ceiling beams. Some nights, you imagine what it would be like to live a different kind of life, one where you wake to servants carrying trays of figs, or spend your days reclining on cushions while someone else sweeps the floor. But then you think about how those houses never smell like bread, how their fires are just for warmth, not devotion, how their cats probably don't curl up on ankles with quite the same snoring charm. No, this is the life you know. You listen to the fading crackle of the coals, the rustle of drying herbs swaying from the ceiling. A fig leaf drifts across the floor, pushed gently by the breeze from the window. You make a mental note to close the shutter, then promptly ignore it. The house smells like the day, barley and ash, laurel and cheese, just a hint of wine and fig. It's hard to tell where your skin ends and the kitchen begins. You're soaked in it, stained by it. One day they'll find your bones and think you are some kind of domestic oracle, wrapped in linen and goat hair, surrounded by bits of amphora and suspicious fig pits. You'd be fine with that. You adjust slightly, just enough to avoid a reed sticking into your back, and let your breath slow to the rhythm of the hearth. In, out, soft, steady, like the breath of fire itself. The cat shifts, lets out a soft snore that's more like a squeaky sigh, and drools on your foot. You don't move, you barely notice. Your mind starts to wander in gentle spirals. You think about the bread you'll bake tomorrow, the chickpeas you left soaking, the new torch design your cousin keeps talking about that probably violates several unwritten codes of fire safety. You think of your grandmother's hands, cracked and flour-dusted, lifting a pot with ease. You think of your mother's voice, low and warm as she told you the story of the goddess who lived in every flame. You think of Hestia, not as a statue or temple relic, but as the hush of coals in the dark, the scent of thyme in boiling broth, the glow that lingers on a sleeping face. You think of the fire, your fire, and then you don't think at all. Your body grows heavy, your breath slows, and your thoughts float away like wisps of ash rising through the smoke hole. Just a kitchen, just a hearth, just a keeper, wrapped in warmth, anchored in quiet, and still, so still, beneath the ember light. The morning doesn't so much arrive as press its way in, soft at first, with a breath of cool air through the shutters, then firmer, with the dull clink of a neighbour's pot outside and the sharp, dignified crow of a rooster who thinks he owns the sun. You stir beneath your blanket, One eye opens. The cat is still on your legs, heavier than physics should allow, purring with obnoxious satisfaction. You blink up at the ceiling beams, still stained faintly with soot and last night's dreams. The fire is waiting. You roll to your side, disturbing the cat, who huffs and relocates to a less human piece of floor. Your back twinges, your shoulders protest. But the hearth never sleeps, and neither do those who serve it. You move through the house in a series of practiced motions, barefoot on cool stone, hands brushing over amphorae to check if they've sweated in the night. One is sticky, somehow. You don't ask questions this early. You just make a note to clean it after the barley's on. You kneel at the hearth, and there it is. Not flame? No, the fire has curled into itself, low and sleepy, but a soft blush of ember beneath the ash. Still breathing, still alive. You whisper your greeting, not words exactly, but a rhythm, a breath. You reach for a dry fig branch and the usual twist of kindling, layering them with reverence and a splash of practicality. A slow exhale, then a spark. The fire returns with a sigh of orange, stretching up toward the rafters, not eager, but ready. You coax it gently, you feed it lightly. This is a conversation now, an old one, older than stone houses or fig trees or wine jars. Outside, the village stirs. Footsteps pass. The goat announces itself with an unnecessary bleat. Someone calls for a daughter. Someone else drops a pot and blames the wind. You grind barley while the fire builds. The mortar rocks against the stone floor in its familiar rhythm. You add water, a splash of oil, a bit of last night's greens. Breakfast is not a thing to be celebrated. It's a thing to be continued. And as the stew begins to simmer again, the cycle turns. There will be sweeping. There will be bread. Someone will need salt. Someone will bring honey. A child will ask why the smoke hole doesn't let rain in, and you'll tell them a story about Hestia shielding the roof with her shawl. The gods are quiet today. No signs, no omens, just the small proof of their presence in the fire that never died. You kneel by it now, stirring a pot, hair already flecked with ash, and think, this is how eternity sneaks in, not with thunder, but with habit, with heat, with the smallest ember carried forward each day. And you, barefoot, soot-smudged, goat-adjacent, are the one who keeps it all turning. The fire's low again, now coaxed into evening hush. The light from the coals doesn't dance anymore. It rests, casting a steady glow across the walls and weaving shadows between the bowls and herb bundles. You sit quietly beside it, blanket over your shoulders, knees tucked to your chest. The last of the dishes are clean. The cat sleeps in its usual spot, a warm little lump twitching through dreams. Outside, the wind brushes the doorframe in gentle intervals, like the breath of some distant sleeping world. Everything has slowed. The stew from earlier still clings to the air, layered with faint rosemary and toasted barley. It's the kind of scent that only fully reveals itself in silence, when the world has softened and you're no longer listening for tasks, only for stillness. You feel your body sink into the floor, heavy and warm, your limbs less separate than they were this morning. The ache in your shoulders isn't a complaint anymore, it's an echo, proof of a day well spent. The fire glows, and you watch it without needing it to do anything else. No pot to stir, no bread to turn, just warmth, just rhythm. You let your thoughts drift, through steam and soup and fig leaves, and settle like ash. The house is quiet, the gods are quiet, and finally, you are too. Sleep comes slowly, like dusk over fields. Not a rush, but a settling, a hush. And in that hush, the fire stays. Not bright, not loud, just alive, always alive. Live, 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 always alive.